guys. Okay, so as cyclists, a lot of the times we don't think that much about muscle. We should be. We really should be. A lot of people don't think about what's taking place in their muscle. They think a lot more about what's taking place maybe with their VO2 max or their power output. And that all stems from your muscle activity. So some basic understanding of this, I think would go a long way for a cyclist to understand training, what's going on, maybe adaptations to their body, and how that can make them a better cyclist, or how that is making them a better cyclist. In order to understand this better, the way I'll break it down is I'll talk about muscle fiber types. The second way I'll break it down is the fuel source that those muscle fiber types use. And the third way I'll break it down is how long those muscle fibers can last, or their fatigue resistance. So there are 3 different muscle fiber types. A lot of the times people will refer to them as type 1 or type 2 fibers. Slow twitch versus fast twitch fibers. Type 1 fibers we often think of as cyclists as our friend. If the intensity is not too high, we can use oxygen as our primary means of making our fuel source ATP. Not very strong in their force production, but yet fatigue resistant. These fibers can be used for hours on end. As long as we keep the intensity low, we can use oxygen in order to break down things like fats within our system in order to create ATP. The second type of fiber is type 2A fibers, the oxidative glycolytic fiber types, or moderate intensity fibers, or our moderate force production fibers. And their fatigue resistant is also that middle ground. We sometimes also refer to these as transitional fibers, and they're used for things like moderate distances, maybe a few minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes, maybe tops, if they're highly trained. The third type of fiber is what we now refer to as type 2X fibers, sometimes called type 2B, and you'll still hear that in animal studies. They are glycolytic in nature, meaning they can use readily available glucose stores in order to create ATP without needing oxygen. These type 2X fibers are fast twitch fibers, high force production fibers. They are low fatigue resistant, meaning that they burn out fast, somewhere about 15 to 30 seconds. If we are untrained or just the average individual walking on the street, you'll typically see somewhere around a 50-50 split between type 1 and type 2 fibers, meaning that 50% of those muscle fibers are type 1, 50% are a combination of type 2A and type 2X fibers. Now, in animal studies, we can see some studies that suggest hyperplasia does take place past adolescence. However, that's not very certain, and in humans, it's not really thought to be the case. So we can X that right away. The second thing is, with sedentary behavior, or even things like aging or certain diseases, we can see atrophy of muscle cells. Atrophy is the shrinking or the loss of innervation in the muscle cells. This overall happens when somebody maybe is bedridden. They have to be put in a wheelchair. You will see muscle loss or atrophy of those muscles. The third way is hypertrophy. If you're in England, hypertrophy. Or maybe you just like to say hypertrophy. I don't know. Hypertrophy is size. Your muscle cells increase in size. They grow. It's the opposite of atrophy. This usually happens with progressive resistance training. We can also see hypertrophy take place in the initial stages of aerobic training. Once you start an activity like cycling, and in the first 6 months or so, you will see muscular growth, hypertrophy there. Through inactivity, what we typically see is a transition of type 1 fibers to type 2X fibers. We also see type 2A fibers transition to type 2X fibers. With training, we often see the transition of type 2X fibers to type 2A fibers. A lot of people believe that with strength training, they will see this transition of type 2A fibers to type 2X fibers. That heavy progressive resistance training is going to make them bulky. It's going to make them have very fast muscles and not endurance-like muscles. And that's just not the case. We see a transition of type 2X fibers with training to type 2A fibers. Those fibers that can use both glucose and oxygen in order to create ATP as its fuel source. We want more type 2A muscle fibers in our body, especially as athletes. Doesn't matter what type of athlete. These type 2A fibers are transitional fibers. They're useful fibers. They produce a lot of force and yet have some fatigue resistance. As a road cyclist, that's what we want. We want fatigue resistance. We want our muscles to be able to react with high force in a short period of time and do it repetitively. We want type 2A fibers. The best way to get this transition or this adaptation is through heavy resistance training.